So you guys just released a pretty wonderful report that I had the pleasure of reading with Forrester. And I have to say, the fact that the first word in the title is optimism made my heart smile as a media geek. So I'm excited to talk about it. You know, I would really sort of like your insight to tell me the motivation behind the report, first of all. What was?
I think, you know, as a company out in the industry talking to a combination of partners on the agency side, partners on the media side, you start to hear themes and rhythms, and you want to know, am I influencing that theme or rhythm, or is that more of a general consensus across the market? And I think as we look to Forrester to help us with this project, it was really helping us identify as to whether or not the direction that we felt like the market was moving was in line with the direction we wanted to move as an organization. So it was really important, and I think we got some really, really strong directional support for some areas, and then some real surprises in others, right?
Okay. So overall, just kind of, if we take a step back at 30,000 feet, are we moving more towards digital buying or TV buying? Because we're talking out of both sides of our mouth as an industry. What's the future look like?
Well, I think the one thing that was consistent is that over the next 3 years, even agencies, advertisers, and media companies agreed that we're going to have a convergence of buying models between TV and online video. So they see trading organizations moving together, buying organizations moving together. And so I think, one, that was a really, really interesting to kind of hear everybody be on the same page, right? And on the same page to the tune of about 65 to 70% in general across all three of those categories. So I think that's important. And I think what that means, out of the research with the report is ultimately what does that mean for automation? And I think when you look at the research and the results, skewed probably slightly higher, that digital will be the organization that will lead a lot of those efforts. But the need for automation in the TV buying side of the world was just as important. So I think one of the things that we have to make sure that we don't do is that we don't have a tremendous amount of silos and kind of look in the next 3 years at, is it TV versus online versus exchange versus upfronts and all these different categories that we can basically put into buckets around the old TV world, if you will, and the digital world. We really have to, I think companies are moving towards, both on the media and the agency side, of looking at this as portfolio management. They have a really large set of assets, both from media partnerships to hundreds of advertisers, thousands of campaigns. All of that stuff has to be managed simultaneously and managed in a way that it drives, to Christy's point earlier, ROI for advertisers, right? Right.
So video is still nascent, especially programmatic video, right? I mean, we have an illiquid market. And in this early stage, I really would love your insight on who's winning, and then in the long tail, in the next 48 months, who wins, the buy side or the sell side? Because that's the constant discussion when we talk about convergence and the fluidity of content and things like that. Who's going to win the battle?
Well, I think the report shows that both sides win. They both believe that they win. The media organizations believe they win because they're going to capture higher CPMs. Agencies and advertisers believe that they win because they're going to get better data and insights and more efficiencies out of that, right? But what we have to make sure, and I think that's actually a phenomenal outcome, because we are in a world with sight, sound, and motion where content does matter and quality matters, and we cannot have a race to the bottom in this industry, because to a certain extent that will destroy a lot of what we do in the advertising landscape from a video perspective. So I think it's a good win that both sides see an upside, because hopefully we continue to produce high quality content that consumers love, that they want to engage with across multiple screens and devices, and both organizations or both sides of the fence can win in that.
And what is sort of most important in accelerating convergence, right? The sort of world of video everywhere, TV and video, online video coming together. What are the factors that are going to get us there fastest?
So I think from my perspective, it goes back to something you said initially and that we've heard along the way, which is it's as simple as driving ROI. And it's a very simple answer, but it's a very complex problem to solve. I think if you look at the fact that all of these screens have different measurement, different types of data, different times in which that data is delivered back, right? Linear results are delivered in a very different time frame than digital results, for example. And so really building systems and automation that allows that data and information to come back in a way that is digestible and understandable, and is proving that we're driving cars off the lot, cereal boxes off the shelf in the grocery store, I think is going to be extremely important. And it's really almost acting like a Rosetta Stone against all of those different variables and outputting something that we understand and we can execute against.
So that's a good point. So going back to some of the early conversations we had, at the kickoff, if we look at the TV versus the digital buy side, do they speak the same language when it comes to ROI, performance, measurement, buying, the workflow, operations? I mean, are they actually, do they have the same MO of business?
I think that, we've approached our planning and the platform that we design around KPIs, right? So what are those key performance indicators that the advertiser wants to achieve? And how does the portfolio of media mix, whether it's traditional,
and
online,
is that advertiser or agency driven? Because that was one of the most sort of the things that resonated the loudest to me in reading this. There were a couple things, but one of it, and I'll actually just read the quote: advertisers are more attracted by the promise of targeting and better communication, while their agencies emphasize interactivity and greater audience attention, right? So when we define those KPIs, is it the trading desk that's buying, or is it their brand communicating through the trading desk?
I think it's the brand communicating to the trading desk, because we're all ultimately beholden to servicing clients, right?
Right.
And I think that we have to look at it from the approach of what's going to continue to allow us to maintain our relationships with, if I'm an agency, with my brands, and deliver results. And I think it's fascinating what we've seen, today of the throughput coming through the platform. 50% of campaigns are selected as agnostic, which means that campaign can be delivered in a digital format, connected TV, online video, tablet, or mobile. As long as that campaign is delivering the ROI against those KPIs I set out to begin with, I really don't care in video where the media mix shifts, which is kind of interesting.
That is.
Because it's one of the areas that I think you see in some other formats where it's still somewhat siloed. So I still have an organization that's over here focused on what my mobile strategy is versus online video and other things.
Well, one of the sort of greatest levers of automation and trading desks is holding companies are starting to consolidate and leverage their purchasing power, right? So when you're aggregating spend, specifically through a trading desk, does it result in the specific and individual advertisers or brands' business KPIs or requirements getting distilled or mooted a bit? Like, what do you think that eventuality is?
Well, I think what's important is that it's extremely important that agencies have the ability to make decisions for outcomes for advertisers. And what I mean by that is that in the world of the publishing side of the world, you're looking at yield optimization. You're looking through the eyes of, I've got a certain amount of inventory and content, and I actually want to maximize the revenue that I have. To a certain extent on the agency side, you want to basically deliver for your brands, right? And I think one of the exciting things about automation that we've seen is that the ability to automate ways in which the agency can decision, I've already bought this impression, right? And some of what we're seeing is very much TV-centric, where we're seeing agencies go out and procure media in futures markets, just like they do in the upfronts. Right. But instead of saying, well, here's a bunch of creative that I'm going to send you and you deliver it, they're being able to see impressions, understand the data associated with those impressions, and make decisions within their portfolio of advertising and campaigns of what to deliver at that point in time, right? So they have a little more control around what their outcomes are for their advertisers and brands versus, a couple of years ago, you shipped something across the fence and you just prayed that it came back that it was delivered.
Well,
right?
I mean, to be consistent in using analogies to financial markets, I mean, are we going to start to see secondary marketplaces evolve that are, confined within holding companies where, there is the blanket order, right? The commit up front, right? Which is interesting, right? Because we talk about the business cycles and where we need to harmonize those, and TV needs to become more like digital or vice versa. But the reality is that when we talk about purchasing power and consolidating buying power, you are making large commitments in a business cycle at a certain period of time, right? So are you going to see a secondary market evolve where there's the blanket order and then there's the actual placement? Like, how does that change the business flow?
I don't know if it's a secondary market as much as, again, you can't look at this business through a bunch of spreadsheets any longer. I think it's really, and that's really where I think the automation comes in, is that you can make portfolio decisions if you've got some pretty big, powerful algorithms behind you helping you along the way, right? Where I think in the market a couple of years ago, you would have been looking maybe at managing that a little bit differently. But I don't know if it necessarily dictates that. I think more of what we see is that it's becoming a blend of what is my upfront and futures market, and how do I blend that with the great things that you get through automation around RTB and exchanges, right? We kind of see that mix as, north of 60-70% on kind of, I'm buying up front and I'm getting guarantees and I'm getting the connection with content and media that I want, and I'm augmenting and complementing those campaigns to deliver KPIs and performance through these other automated tools that have existed, right?
Sounds a lot like TV.
It's a lot like TV,
yeah.
right? So it's kind of it's kind of interesting, but you have the insights and knowledge that you have coming from a digital perspective that I think in some cases makes workflow more efficient, and in others it makes it complex, right?
But it is a different set of skills and talent. So last thing, biggest surprise in the research, like in this endeavor?
Well, I think that there was a comment that was, agencies were really looking at the excitement around programmatic and automation. Advertisers were looking for more connection with content and media companies, and if you think about it, they both need automation, right? Yeah. And so I think that the alignment that we are seeing here is exciting. I think the only thing that really means for us is that our jobs are getting harder because things are going to move faster. Because when both sides of an equation feel like that there's a win, there's naturally, I think, a race, right?
Yep.
And it's fun to be part of the race, and I think everybody that's in this room today is kind of, I think we're blessed to be living this right now. We may look back and say this is a really exciting time in the industry.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for being a leader in it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.